Well, hey, everybody, Mike Griffith here. Welcome to tonight's Ingles on the Beat segment. Very pleased to bring tonight's special guest on, Mr. Paul Finebaum from the SEC Network, ESPN. Paul, really appreciate you joining me tonight.
Mike, it's my pleasure. It's so great to be with you, and I can't wait to talk about the upcoming season and all the things that are going on.
No doubt it is talking season. We're just a few weeks away from SEC Media Days, and no telling what's going to come out of there, what storylines are going to explode. Already, though, Paul, a lot of changes in college football have made this a busier off season than I suppose what we're accustomed to. And I'm going to start right here at Georgia. It's a Georgia program, obviously, and I look at the Georgia Bulldogs adding players like a Tyke Smith. Here's a guy that was an honorable mention, All-American from West Virginia, star player, that hybrid linebacker safety. Darian Kendrick maybe could start at cornerback. He was an All-ACC player at Clemson. And then Rick Gilbert, a guy that a lot of people were excited about at LSU now, transitioning from tight end to wide receiver. This one-time transfer, how'd you feel about it on the front end? And now that we see the results, Georgia Reload, how do you feel about it now?
Mike, I like it. I've always felt the old rule was very restrictive and unfair, and people cringe when I try to bring up that coaches can move without penalty, but players can't. But I think this is the age of the player, and quite frankly, I like it. And I know what everyone's saying, that there very few are getting places. Under 8% or something like that, or players are finding homes. But that's their choice. And I think in Georgia's case, nobody has taken advantage of this recently better than Kirby Smart. And it's just the nature of the game. It never ends. Recruiting does not stop on National Signing Day. You have to get the players there, and then you have to keep them. Kirby Smart has been hurt as badly as anyone by players leaving. We know that. Just hit the button on Justin Fields, but he's done extremely well. And I think there were a couple of question marks about Georgia a month or two ago. There are fewer question marks today.
Yeah, I think the transfer portal's got a lot to do with it. And you're right, Paul. Georgia was kind of on the front end of this. When Justin Fields transferred out, it got a lot of national news. As it turned out, Justin Fields didn't go any further in the college football playoffs than Jake Fromm did. And if you look at the numbers last year, Georgia's offense actually did more against the Alabama defense than Ohio State and Justin Fields. So that puzzle will never be solved. But just as the transfer portal took it away, it delivered JT Daniels from Southern California. Now, JT, an interesting guy, Paul. He came out and he was almost as celebrated as Trevor Lawrence and Justin Fields. He was actually rated third in that class. But he goes to USC, and you know how it is. You disappear on the West Coast. And he goes away for a year. He gets injured. He pops up, and from his start at Mississippi State on the rest of the year, he had the highest passer rating of any of the returning quarterbacks. And yet I looked at the Phil Steele magazine, and we both respect Phil. We recently had him on the Finebaum show. He's got Matt Corral from Ole Miss ahead of him. I've heard Bryce Young ahead of him. Where are you at on the buy-in level for JT Daniels?
I understand the criticism, and I had a coach hit me up the other day and asked me, why am I so high on JT Daniels? He said, what else has he done other than, or who else did he play other than Cincinnati? And that's fair. We're talking about someone who I think is one of the best quarterbacks in the country. But you've given me part of my answer. The second part of my answer, Mike, is that he just has the it factor. And to be a great quarterback, you have to have that. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on Matt Corral or Bryce Young. I have no earthly idea if Bryce Young is going to be a great quarterback. I had a caller the other day say he's going to be better than Tua Tagovailoa. I'm like going, are you out of your mind? I mean, we're talking about one of the greatest quarterbacks in SEC history. He may be good, good for him. But I think JT Daniels is. I don't think it's a question. I don't even think it's debatable. He's the best quarterback in the SEC, and he's experienced too. I mean, this is not somebody who's just rolling out of bed. He's got a lot of experience. He's had a lot of hard knocks, and he's in a really good place too, with a lot around him. He's not going to be by himself in the backfield.
Yeah, I guess that would be the second part of my question here. And when I played devil's advocate on the JT Daniels and why others might put a Matt Corral or a Bryce Young, I sense that there's still some people that aren't quite convinced that Kirby Smart is going to turn this offense loose. Now, he went out and hired a guy in Todd Monken that's pretty talented. And granted, Georgia's quarterback situation last year wasn't the best with the injury to JT, keeping him out until the last 4 games, and Jamie Newman kind of flying the coop. And I don't know what milk carton he's on now. I don't know where he's at. And Stetson Bennett steps in, a former walk-on 4-string quarterback. Paul, are you convinced that we're going to see Kirby cut Georgia loose in a way that's going to enable JT Daniels to put up prolific numbers? Or are we going to see Georgia running the ball 12 out of 14 plays in the fourth quarter when they're up 3 touchdowns on folks?
Well, we're about to enter into the twilight zone here in this conversation because we're entering the Kirby Smart conundrum, and I think he's going to. And I've made a vow in the second half of my career, Mike. I don't criticize other shows. I don't criticize other writers. I've done that in the past. There's no reason to. Everyone's entitled to their opinion. However, I think the single laziest, most disingenuous argument in college football is that Kirby Smart is not an elite coach. I mean, that's just total BS. And if we weren't on a family show, I'd use stronger language. And I hear it every day on our program. I hear it when we gather as media members, and it's always the same. He's stubborn. He gets in his own way. He's a great recruiter, but not. I mean, if you're to be a great coach, you have to be a great recruiter. Don't hold it against Kirby Smart that he's a great recruiter. He's blown. He's blown 2 double-digit leads against Alabama. Who else has ever had a double-digit lead against Alabama to blow? I mean, come on. I mean, this has to stop. I mean, this is just insanity, and I have a feeling we're going to continue to hear it. And I mean, I guess until Kirby Smart wins a national championship, every talk show Bubba in the South is going to throw that out to his audience like chum to sharks. And yeah, I'm going to keep defending Kirby Smart because I know Kirby Smart. I've known him a long time. I watched him as an assistant. I know how much Nick Saban thinks of him. I know how much other coaches think of him. And he's still relatively young in his career. 5 years into Saban's tenure, he hadn't won a national championship yet. Do I think Kirby is going to win one? Yes. Do I think this is the year? It's very possible. I said this the other day, and I'll say it again. I think Georgia's going to beat Clemson. Originally I wasn't sure about that when Pickens went down. That was a long time ago. That was a lot of players in the portal, and I just think it's time for the media to concentrate on things that are real instead of making stuff up about Kirby Smart.
Paul, I think part of it is that Kirby has come so close to slaying the dragon. And you're right. He's led Saban at halftime, all 3 meetings. And yes, he lost. But, you look at Kirby's career over 5 years, he's only lost 4 games that he led at halftime. 3 were to Saban, and the other one was to the really good Tennessee Butch Jones offense on a Hail Mary at Sanford Stadium. Other than that, when Georgia's leading at halftime, they win. He's 10-6 against top 10 teams. You'd be hard-pressed to find another coach that's done that much. So I think, to your point, it has gotten blown out of proportion, but in part because I think a lot of people are ready to see Alabama get beat. And I think a lot of people pin their hopes on Kirby Smart being the guy that would finally get that done. And to your point, this is a loaded team in the game against Clemson and Charlotte. Pretty fascinating to me now. And I guess this is a little bit of a sidebar. The game is being played in Charlotte, North Carolina, Paul. Do we make anything out of that? I mean, that's Clemson. They play in the ACC championship game there every year now. Is there any advantage to be found there? You think that doesn't matter where that game's played as long as it's neutral?
First of all, this game shouldn't be in Charlotte. And let me offer to the audience that doesn't know, I live in Charlotte. I can walk up and down my street and run into Clemson fans. I mean, maybe there was a time, this was a North Carolina town. Maybe there was a time when South Carolina people, but lately it's Clemson. And I'm not teaching geography here. That's a 7th grade course, but Charlotte sits on the South Carolina border. I mean, I've driven between Charlotte and Clemson, South Carolina, It's not very far. I've come back from Atlanta after the championship game, and as you head up the interstate, you're seeing the Clemson fans heading home by the thousands. This is a Clemson town. Now, should that be a factor in the game? No, uh, but this is clearly it's clearly an advantage for Clemson to play the game in Charlotte, North/South Carolina. So, but I'm glad they're playing it. I mean, this is the defining game of the college football season, at least going in. I think Georgia has far more upside in this game than Clemson. I think Georgia wins this game, and they're number one in the country the following Monday. I don't know how you get around that. If they lose, you know the argument, Mike. You swim in this every day. They're not a whole lot worse for it. I think they'll still run the table. I think they'll play Alabama in the championship game, and they'll have a chance to get back in. But you know, if they win the game, it gives them a much easier path, though.
Now, this is, you talk about beating down topics, but I've got to ask it. I mean, Alabama extends Nick Saban's deal through 2029. I think, what is he, 69 years? And listen, there's nothing against, 69 is the new 49. I mean, Saban takes incredible care of himself. He shows no signs of slowing down. But we're talking about an 8-year contract extension for Nick Saban. How much of that is posturing? How much of that is a message from Alabama to recruits versus, hey, that's just the cost of doing business. That's what Nick wants.
Well, I think the main reason they gave it to him was, first of all, it really doesn't cost anything. It's just a piece of paper, and what it really does is on October 31st this year, it mitigates the fact that Nick Saban turned 70. That's a big date. I'm in my 60s. All of a sudden, you think, 70? I mean, Nick Saban has made 70 sound young again, which is pretty remarkable when you think about it. But they have to do that. They're fighting Kirby on one side. They're fighting everybody else in the recruiting wars around the country. And they are determined not to let age be a factor. And listen, I covered Bear Bryant. Recruiting did him in, and I know after the fact he died after he stepped down. But his last recruiting class was brutal. Pat Dye came in as a young upstart and cleaned his clock, and that included Bo Jackson, who lived down the street from Alabama and always wanted to go there. But Saban can't afford that. So I'll say this in conclusion, Mike. I have no earthly idea when Nick Saban is going to step down. And I know what, Alabama fans have now been conditioned to think he will be there until he's 150. I doubt it. I doubt he'll be there at the end of this contract, but the one thing we really can't use against him any longer is, well, he just turned 70, right? 71, 72. At some point he'll walk away. I have no earthly idea when that is.
That's pretty fascinating analogy there, Paul. Bear Bryant and Pat Dye to Kirby Smart and young Kirby Smart and Nick Saban. That should be interesting to see. Yeah, another coach that got extended, and this was interesting. This is kind of a sign of the times. Dan Mullen, in the midst of a show cause, which these days doesn't seem to matter very much in any collegiate sport. I don't know how much the NCAA, it's kind of a logo out there to put on the basketball court in the tournament, I suppose. But Mullen now extended through 2026, and this is after losing the last 3 games. I mean, I understand. Listen, I was there. I saw, I've seen what Dan Mullen's offenses can do, and certainly what Kyle Trask did with Kyle Pitts and Tony was very impressive. I mean, they hung 38 on Georgia in 1/2. I mean, that doesn't just happen. But still, an extension through 2026 for Mullen that makes him the 3rd highest paid coach in the SEC. Is this warranted, or is this false hope from the Gators?
I think it's just the nature of doing business in 2021. Of all the athletic directors that I think the two of us, I'll speak for you, would like to get some truth serum in, it would probably be Scott Strickland, because what does he really think, or is he just doing it because he has to do it? I don't know the answer. The show cause didn't faze anyone, but the new narrative, as you know, I heard it the other night on our show. I mean, Georgia almost beat Alabama in the SEC championship game. Well, these narratives get created, um, and that's great. Okay, I mean they were down by 17, they came back. Final score does matter if you're creating a narrative. But I was surprised. I thought the end of the season for Mullen was about as embarrassing as I've seen in a long time. I thought if you picked out some of his behavioral tendencies during the season, it was shocking. It really was. And no reason to recount all that. And I think this year can be good for them. I don't think they're going to come close to beating Alabama or Georgia. They may go 10-2 and have another great year. But ultimately, if you're at the University of Florida, you better compete for national championships. And embarrassing yourself against was it Oklahoma? I guess in the I'm trying to remember. I think it was Oklahoma in the Cotton Bowl. Doesn't exactly enhance your well-being. You have to start recruiting at a higher level, and I think in some ways, there are a few members of the jury that are still out on Dan Mullen.
No doubt. You mentioned the Florida Oklahoma game, Paul. I can tell you that Georgia's had a captain miss their last 3 games, non-playoff games. It's part of why this expanded playoff makes so much sense, because guys are saying, look, if this game doesn't matter, I'm not playing it. Not too long ago, Mark Richt threw out a 32 playoff team idea. He said, that's not because I don't like the Bulls. It's because I want to see the kids playing in the postseason. And if a few guys are sitting out, how long before a team just says, we're not showing up? And so, getting into that expanded playoff talk, you've heard it as much as I have. 12 teams. Sankey was a part of the commission that came up with the idea. Bob Bowlesby of the Big 12. You had a Mountain West commissioner from the Group of 5. It's a pretty good indication. And Jack Swarbuck from Notre Dame. Notre Dame has to have a seat at the table. Certainly, we can't forget Notre Dame, Paul. We have to. And now that but just your general thoughts on this 12-team proposal? I know we've heard it could start as early as 2023, but we've heard Greg Sankey say, hey, let's temper the expectations. The contract runs through 2025. What do you think of it, and how soon do you think we might see it?
Well, I don't want to hear another word about it until I know when it is, because if it's not till 2026, we're wasting our breath. This is just college football doing its usual routine, and I still think we'll get it done sooner. And I'm not even sure why it has to be 23. I mean, Bill Hancock just decided arbitrary day, 23. Oh, okay, great. I think college football will take a massive hit if it's not done in relatively soon. And what I mean by that is season after next, because all their arguments, which they keep changing, keep moving the goalposts, are going to get shattered if we have to wait 4 or 5 more years. I don't think college football can afford to wait 5 more years. Yeah, I think it's in perilous shape, at least in terms of the postseason. So I hope they do it. Everyone's playing the blame game. Can't get the contracts worked out. I mean, that's just. I mean, we can bring country. The United States and Russia had a summit a couple of weeks ago. I mean, if you can get those 2 countries to sit down for 3.5 hours in Helsinki, I think you can get lawyers for the Big Ten and the Rose Bowl and ESPN and the college football playoff in a room at a nice 5-star resort after they played golf and had rub downs and sipping mineral water in the steam room and then a 5-course meal. I think you can get them in a room and figure this thing out, Mike. I mean, it's the most ridiculous thing I've ever heard. That it's really complicated, and we need to temper our expectations. I'm not tempering mine. Let me know when you get this done. Until then, quit wasting our time.
Drill down, trickle down question that's come out of this when we talk about how this playoff might work. Obviously, these conferences, the objective for every one of them is to get as many teams into the playoff as they can. Obviously, it certainly helps if you have allies on the college football playoff committee. They still play a role as things would work. It would be the 6 highest ranked conference champions, and then the next 6 would be determined by the college football playoff committee. Paul, there's been speculation that as a result of this process, maybe you eliminate divisions in the leagues and just pick the 2 best teams. Now, right now, the Big 12 is the only conference that does it. Well, they don't really have teams to really divide it up. Would you be in favor of seeing the SEC eliminate divisions, or do you like the East-West division component to the way the Southeastern Conference determines their conference champion?
Well, I think the reason we have divisions now in football, and everyone knows we don't have them in baseball. Excuse me, basketball, where we used to have convoluted things where a team could win the West and not even get an NCAA berth. Is television. You're making games at the end of the season more meaningful, and I think that is the advantage. In the 12-team playoff, I don't think that matters a whole lot. Because I think getting to Atlanta, I mean, how many times have we had this false narrative? Jim McElwain, oh, well, he got to Atlanta twice. I mean, come on, the guy was a clown as a head coach, but he got to Atlanta twice. Missouri got there. One of the Missouri, I think, did Missouri get there once or twice? I can't remember, but one of the teams
Twice.
Missouri got there. Yeah, but the first time they were really a good team. The second team, they didn't belong anywhere near there. So that keeps, that's just one of those things in college athletics. So I mean, the competition would be better if we had the best two. But I understand it. I do work at a television network, so I understand the advantage to having a critical SEC East game here today between Kentucky and Georgia. Yeah. So I mean, without that game no longer has a lot of meaning.
Oh, it's interesting. It's an interesting facet. You're right. Certainly, I think maybe the Georgia-Florida game could lose meaning as well, unless
Right.
Florida starts to reemerge. Because I think if we talk about top teams, I would say Texas A&M has probably elbowed their way into the conversation. And speaking of which, Paul, it looks like Jimbo Fisher is really starting to throw his weight around. Some comments earlier this offseason, and granted, off the cuff and boosters around, but still, should we be feeling the ground quaking around us? Is this A&M sleeping giant that we've seen for decades with all their resources, their tremendous facility, and now their $74 million head coach? Could this be the year of the Aggies and Jimbo Fisher, or are you not quite bought in on that one yet?
I am bought in overall on the program, and many people have gone broke saying that Texas A&M is the next. I mean, I had a book in 2014 where I wrote that Texas A&M is the greatest threat to Alabama. I may be writing that in 2044. I think they are a threat. I don't think it's going to happen this year. And Jimbo didn't just say that off the cuff. I mean, he had thought about that. And you've been to College Station enough times. That was red meat to a bunch of Texans who ate it up. And if you don't say that out there, then you're not a real Texan.
Speaking of red meat, name, image, likeness has certainly made college sports more attractive for these athletes. And July 1st, it's going to start in 6 different states: Alabama, Mississippi, Florida, Georgia, Texas, New Mexico. I bring up Auburn. Someone said, can you imagine if they'd have had this before? I said, yeah, Cam Newton would have played for Mississippi State. You think about the dynamics of how name, image, likeness works, and, the potential for these former alumni who own businesses now to reach out above the board and pay these players. I mean, at Georgia already, we've heard that Onward Reserve, an outfitter out of Buckhead, very high end, very nice clothes, is already the word is they're targeting 5 Georgia athletes that are going to get offers on July 1st. And apparently at this point, and I know you had Drew Butler on, and we've certainly had him on our show, there's no ceiling on this. There's no cap as things stand. There's no salary cap. So then I reel it back, Paul, and I say, as we look into our crystal ball, what programs does this benefit the most, and which programs, could Alabama and Tuscaloosa actually be at a disadvantage here because their media market isn't as big as what A&M may have in Texas with nearby Houston or even Georgia and Atlanta? Or am I outthinking myself here, or what do you see when you look into your crystal ball with NIL?
No, I think it's there's a lot of unknown, but if you're asking me, at least in this part of the country, who tends to gain the most, it would be Georgia. Georgia has very cleverly positioned Athens as a bedroom community of Atlanta, and it is really when you get right down to it. And you just have such a mass area there. And if you're sitting there in the city of Atlanta, yeah, you can find an Alabama, Tennessee, Carolina, Duke fan walking down the street, but you're mainly going to find dogs, and that's a tremendous advantage. As far as Alabama media market, it clearly doesn't relate, but the passion of Alabama fans will probably make up for it. But the one thing I'm really curious about, Mike, is every small business owner has to make a living and has to meet a payroll. And yeah, they may experiment with this, but after a while they won't. They'll go, okay, well, number 7, he really didn't deliver for me on social media, so he's out. I mean, listen, I work for a public company. You work for a big company. We don't live in a world any longer where you get handouts. And I think there will be the most fascinating part of this NIL is how small and even big business deal with college athletes. We all love them, but we're not going to love them if they're not selling our product any longer.
That's fascinating. You're right, Paul. There has to be a return, and certainly these businesses have an obligation to the customers. Paul, I can't thank you enough for your visit today, and I can't thank my sponsor Ingles enough. In fact, I want to take a moment to recognize Ingles. You talk about people that deliver again and again, and Ingles has certainly done that. Let's now take a moment to recognize Ingles.
It's in our hearts to feel for real. There's been ups and downs, turnarounds, good days and some bad, but we stand together for worse and for better. We'll always have your back with open arms, heart to heart, hand in hand, community strong.
Well, welcome back to the program. Obviously, Paul Finebaum with some great insights. Always fun to talk with Paul. Obviously, Paul and I did a pre-record on the show tonight. I wanted to make sure I could bring him to you, and we have to work around his schedule a little bit. He's obviously very busy, but what the things that he was saying about Georgia, you can tell that Finebaum. I don't want to say all in because I don't want to speak for Paul, but clearly very optimistic about the Bulldogs' future. We talked about NIL there at the end, and he said, "Hey, Georgia could benefit more from NIL than any other program." He explained why. I mean, Atlanta, just a huge metropolitan area, currently number 7 in the country, most recently. So that's big. You heard him talk about JT Daniels and Paul saying he felt like JT had the it factor, and we talked about that on our Cover 4 program last week. And guys were asking me, well, why do you think, does he not need a larger sample size? And man, I saw enough. I don't know about you, but that Mississippi State game was very losable that night. And again, on paper, Mississippi State is this and Georgia's that. But that night in that stadium, under those circumstances, the way those Maroon Bulldogs, were shutting down the running game, it was pretty much all on JT Daniels. If JT doesn't have a 400-yard game, I'm not sure that Georgia wins that game if JT doesn't throw those deep balls that we hadn't seen the extent of which in any games in the Kirby Smart. I'm not sure. And that's JT's first game out. Think about that. Here's a guy who hasn't played or competed in a game. And gosh, you got to go back to September of 2019, right? So almost a year and a half when he played the first half, hadn't played a full game in almost 2 years. So for that to have been his audition, that said a lot, right? And then they steamrolled South Carolina. The numbers could have been ridiculous, but we all know Kirby is a gentleman, right? And I mentioned that in the Finebaum interview of does he keep his foot on the gas? Because, he's not just a gentleman. He's also pretty smart. And the fewer snaps that you play, the less opportunities for guys to get hurt. How do you balance that versus developing talent and keeping receivers happy and improving the odds that you're going to be able to retain these players by giving them some numbers and throwing them the football, or continuing to recruit great quarterbacks, which, by the way, Georgia has not had much of a problem of if you look at this stacked roster, and with Gunnar Stockton already committed, right, and Arch Manning with a recent visit, although I'm not real bullish that they'll get him. There's too many players in that game and too much ahead of him to play early at Georgia, I would presume. Now, things can change. Who knows what conversation we're going to be having about the Georgia quarterback room next year, right? But reeling it back in, it was very interesting to hear Paul talk about the Bulldogs defend Kirby Smart against the narrative that you hear so often. Well, he hasn't beaten Saban yet. Yeah, but he's come closer than anyone else. And I contend that a lot of the reason why the nation has, that opinion of Kirby is because they want to see Kirby knock Nick Saban off his perch. And when he hasn't done that, I think there's been some disappointed fans, and that's not just Georgia fans, but I think nationally. I think I'm with Paul in the sense that Lewis Kirby is 45 years old, man. And while I don't think he's going to be a head coach in 20 years, I'm not saying he won't. But if I had to bet, I'd say no, simply because the amount of money that he can make in the next 10 years, or maybe perhaps even go to the NFL once he wins one or two. Who knows? 3 national championships. I think it's possible. Georgia's got the greatest. I mean, they have wonderful resources. And now you take a look at the new $80 million football building, right? And Sanford Stadium and some of the scheduling that's taking place. To me, that's the handwriting on the wall. Just what's going to happen in Athens over these next 5 to 7 years under Kirby Smart. So, very impressed, with where Georgia football is at right now. And I brought up those transfers to Paul because I don't think, if you're on the outside looking in, and if you're honest, how much do you really know about A&M camp, or how much do you know about the changes at Alabama? Maybe you've studied Clemson a little bit more. But my point and where I'm going with this is I don't think other people really realize just how much Kirby Smart has gotten done in the transfer portal in this offseason. Tyke Smith, a guy from West Virginia, played the exact same position for the Mountaineers for Jamal, the new DB coach at Georgia for Jamal Adai, that he's going to play with the Bulldogs. I don't think that's going to be a complicated transition. I know that some people might say, well, he's new, he hadn't played in the system. He's played in a very similar system, and he's played for this secondary coach. I expect him to be boom, plug and play, and probably a level up from what Tyreek Stevenson would have given you. Of course, Tyreek transferred to Miami. So you lost Tyreek Stevenson in the portal to Miami, and you hate it because he had potential, and he's a guy Georgia was grooming, but he wanted to go back home, and there's probably some NIL considerations for him there. And then you plug in Tyke. And I like that trade-off. I think that's a win, right? To me, that's a win. You get a guy that wants to be here for a guy that didn't really want to be here, okay? And I don't think you drop off in terms of what the performance would be. Darian Kendrick, the transfer from Clemson, all ACC. Listen, I, as much as anybody, would have liked to have seen DJ Daniels stay around for another year. I'm not really sure why he didn't, okay? He went undrafted to Jacksonville. I think Jacksonville got a steal. I think he should have been a draft pick. But for whatever reason, DJ Daniel left, even though he could have stayed another year. And of course, he was the talented transfer, started in 2019 last year, had the high ankle sprain, kind of put him behind Tyson Campbell and Eric Stokes. No shame in that. I mean, that's a first-round pick and the start of the second-round pick. Would have liked seeing DJ, but maybe DJ just ready to get paid and go, okay, that's fine. So you lost 3 corners in 1 year. You had to have immediate help. And I like Darian Kendrick, and I know that he had some incidents and issues at Clemson, right? He got kicked off the team. He missed some workouts. But this is a guy, he'll tell you, he's got 2 small children. He was tending to some things, didn't communicate it properly. Clemson did what they had to do. Give Dabo credit. He said, hey, I love this kid. We had to do what we had to do. Rules are rules. And I give Georgia some credit for looking at Darian Kendrick and really evaluating this. And okay, yeah, there was, he had unlawful possession of a firearm or a misdemeanor, but still, the guy falls asleep with according to the police report, with a gun in his lap and sleeping in, and trace amounts of marijuana citation. Not a great look, nothing for commercials, not anything you want to put on a billboard. But look, a young guy that makes a mistake, a young guy that was at a hard time in life, makes a mistake, and Georgia says, you know what? We're going to evaluate this. We're going to talk to this kid. We're going to talk to people that know him. And Georgia's going to make a decision. And they decide, yes, we're going to give this guy a second chance. And if Darian Kendrick can pull it all together and have a great next 8 or 9 months, he's going to be making millions in the NFL, and he'll be able to support his family, right? So Georgia opening that door and Kendrick coming through it. I think Kendrick starts opposite of Jalen Kimber. I like Amir Speed playing a lot. I think you're going to see him a lot. I think Keely Ringo is going to grow into this. I mean, now you've got 4 very good corners, albeit other than Kendrick, not very experienced. Speed's got a little bit more experience than maybe you think, just from working out on all those drills and the way that he's really attacked. And I like Amir in certain matchups. He's a really long corner. So I guess what I'm saying is, yeah, there's no doubt. I just don't think you can avoid drop-off when you go from Eric Stokes and Tyson Campbell to the next group, but not as much as you think because of the transfer portal and also the Tyke Smith addition. And Chris Smith is back now, got some experience in safety. He'll be playing next to Scene. Do we think he's going to be Richard LeCount? Certainly not. Richard was fantastic and probably on his way to an All-American campaign. But my point is, I don't think the secondary drops off as much as maybe first glance. And that's transfer portal, right? And that's Kirby Smart. That's Kirby recruiting and getting the guys. And you told us he was going to do this at signing day. So it wasn't like he was fooling. But I don't know where Brandon Turnage, the Alabama guy that comes in, a former 101 ranked in the nation, 4-star guy, buried on the Tide depth chart. He's got 3 years left. Kirby wants to bring him in. And you know what? He freaks out because Darian kicked. Look, Turnage, George is not going to hand you anything. There's no guarantees. We report you don't want to come, and we report it, and you say everybody relax with the rumors. Well, we're relaxed. All right, it's been 3 weeks. Where are you, man? Is he coming to Georgia? Is he not coming to Georgia? Is he going somewhere else? I don't understand this. I thought Brandon Turnage was a guy, and I wrote it, that would really beef up and increase the competition. He's a guy that can play corner. He's a guy that can play safety. He's a competitor. There's a reason he chose Alabama. He knew he was going against the best. He had to know choosing Georgia in the portal, you're still going against the best. All right. It's not like this is some drop down program. The talent is right there. So what happens to Turnage, I don't know. But with Kendrick and Smith, I think the secondary is fine. Turnage would make it better. I don't know where he'll end up. He's not at Georgia yet, not on the roster as of the taping of the show. Rick Gilbert, great addition. Now, this is interesting because you're transitioning a tight end to the wide receiver position. How will that work out? You're looking at Gilbert to be the X. That's a position that formerly played by George Pickens. If there was one bad thing you could say about the offense, and I can actually think of 2 or 3, or maybe questionable thing, but if there was one, it was when Pickens got hurt in the spring. You went, oh my gosh, this was the guy. This was the 1,000-yard receiver, 100-catch guy. Yeah, he probably was. But you put Gilbert in there, and now you got a matchup problem. No, he's not Pickens. Not many people are. But he presents a matchup problem, and I think he's going to evolve into an extremely, extremely talented receiver. And you got Marcus Rosemy-Jacksaint playing there as well. And, you talk about a great route runner with strong hands. That's what Rosemy-Jacksaint can give you. So I think you're fine there. Again, probably a little bit of a drop-off from Pickens, but by going to the portal, once again, Kirby Smart has answered the question. The offensive line has been recruited so well. Those answers will come out of camp. At left tackle, is it Xavier Truss? Is it Jamari Salyer? Is it Marius Mims? Perhaps Broderick Jones? I don't know who ends up there, but you got to think somebody really good is going to be there. But they got to be good against Clemson right out of the gate. I thought it was interesting. Paul talked about Clemson, that the game shouldn't be in Charlotte, Charlotte being a Clemson town. To me, that's throwing down the gauntlet. I know how these Georgia fans travel, man. Unbelievable. Can Georgia take over Charlotte? That's going to be something worth watching. I know that Dog Nation will have some events surrounding that. They'll probably have a little something to maybe give Georgia another shot in the arm with some things they're working on. So pretty fascinating stuff to me. A lot to consider this offseason. I'm all about the NIL, talking to Drew Butler. I like how it's going. I like that Georgia's at the front on this. July 1st, this is going to kick in. I think that gives Georgia an advantage over some states. Again, Florida and Alabama and Mississippi already have it enacted, so does Texas. But other states don't. It's a leg up early on. It shows Georgia cares about the athletes, that they were willing to get this legislation passed. You saw Brian Kemp even go so far as to say he hopes it helps Georgia win the championship. So pretty interesting to me to see the direction of name, image, likeness. And I think that Georgia is well positioned to benefit, probably as well, if not better than anyone, because of the proximity of Atlanta and because of the sophistication that you see in the athletic department from Josh Brooks. He's a younger guy, but Josh is very contemporary when it comes to these things. He's got his, thumb on the pulse. He really understands what's happening. And I think that's a big advantage to have a younger, very proactive athletic director like Josh Brooks at a time like this when there's all these changes. This is where your leadership gets tested the most, is when there's changes, right? No one likes to, everybody wants to just maintain it, defender strategy. Let's just keep everything the way it is. That's just not reality, right? You either evolve or you get passed by. When we think about Nick Saban and his continued success, what does he do? He evolves. He loses coaches every year. He replaces them. He does things different ways. He keeps winning. I think Kirby Smart, much the same, and I'm also very optimistic that Kirby is going to turn them loose in the fourth quarter. And what I mean by that is I do think JT will post prolific numbers. And I also think that when Carson Beck and or Stetson Bennett or who knows Brock Vandergrift gets in the game, I don't think that means there's just going to be handoffs. I think George is going to continue to throw the football because I think Kirby Smart understands that now retention is more important than ever because of one-time transfers, right? And the ability of these guys to leave, use them or lose them. And I think Kirby will understand that. And I think you're going to see Georgia change with the times in that area. So some great thoughts today. I hope you've enjoyed the program. Again, want to thank Paul for coming on. Obviously, I do his show each week in the fall season, and on occasion in the off season, he'll give me a ring and like to step up and give some strong opinions and back it up with facts. That's kind of the name of the game. I mean, we all love talking football, and we all have a little bit different perspective. And it's just worked out in my career where I've had great opportunities to move up at each stop. Different organizations, different newspapers, different digital entities, whether it was Auburn to Alabama, Tennessee, now Georgia. I've seen the SEC from a few different angles, covered several different sports. And so it gives me a perspective, right? And I like to share that with you guys on our Eagles on the Beat every Monday night. I hope you've enjoyed tonight's show. I hope you all have a wonderful week. Have a very safe 4th of July. And I look forward to talking to you again. So if you got any questions or comments, please add them to the comment section. And I'll circle back and answer them for you and give you some feedback. So everybody, thanks for joining me and have a great week.